Welcome to Dr. Leah Schuman's masterclass over performance anxiety. We at Vandercook are so thrilled that you all are here joining us tonight. Performance anxiety is very prevalent in our society today, and when you hear the words perform in front of a crowd, I want you to find the reaction button and show me what you feel like when you hear that phrase. So go ahead and find your reaction button, and maybe some of you will feel like this, some of you will feel excited. Go ahead and find your reaction button and let us know, what does that phrase make you feel like? All righty. Awesome. Well, before we get started, I wanted to tell you guys a couple of things about tonight's masterclass. If you have questions at any time, feel free to put them in the chat, and I will tell Dr. Schuman your question, and she will be able to answer you. But she might also ask for you guys to speak throughout. So if you raise your hand, I can definitely make sure to call on you, and you guys can converse. But for the most part, we are going to use the chat. If you wouldn't mind staying on mute, so it'll help our presentation and her presentation as well, that would be great. And I'm just going to really quickly introduce Dr. Schuman. Alrighty, Dr. Leah Schuman holds a doctorate of musical arts and a master's degree in trumpet performance and literature from the Easton School of Music, a graduate certificate in performance from the St. Petersburg State Conservatory in Russia, and a bachelor's degree in trumpet performance from Northwestern University. Dr. Schuman has worked with hundreds of teachers and students to refine and develop their work on brass instruments. Since 2018, Dr. Schuman has been the executive director of Vandercook's One City Outreach Program, providing free music instruction to underserved middle school students from south of downtown. In addition to teaching at Vandercook, Dr. Schuman is an active performer and clinician across the Chicagoland area and a former member of the St. Petersburg State Chamber Orchestra. And without further ado, here is Dr. Schuman. Let's give her a round of applause.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see you here. Please feel free to show your faces too. I would love to see more of you if you'd like to. So I wanted to begin by finding out a little bit more about you. Let's see what we have here in terms of age groups. So let's divide it into pre-high school, high school, college, or professional. So those are our four age groups. Let me just see a visual show of hands, or you can put it in the chat. How many of you are pre-high school? You can just say me in the chat or raise your hands. How many of you are high school age? Okay, that looks like the biggest group so far. How many of you are college age? Looks like some college and professionals. Okay, so we got a good mix. Nice. It's interesting to see that there's no one pre-high school, because I think a lot of times performance anxiety, I know this was the case for me, it's something that creeps in as we get into more and more advanced levels of performance, and we feel that the expectations are higher and higher for us. What about instrument groups? I'm curious whether we have mostly brass players, because I'm a brass player. So let's see, between woodwinds, brass, strings, percussion, voice, and other. How many of you are brass players? You can either do a visual show of the hands or put it in chat. Okay, what about woodwinds? Yeah, that's a better idea. Why don't you just put your instrument in the chat rather than doing a show of hands? That works really well. So we got some voice, clarinet, bass clarinet, strings, and percussion. So we got a real mix. Okay, very nice. And then one more question for you, and you can just put this in the chat. I'm curious, when you're experiencing performance anxiety or excitement, which is sort of the other side of the coin, what are some of the symptoms that we've got one of Matt Ingelson's students. Please tell Mr. Ingelson hello. Actually, I have a quote at the very end of this presentation that's from that I got from him. So what are some of the symptoms that you experience? You can just put them in the chat when you're feeling nervous. Does anybody feel their heart rate accelerate, their heartbeat accelerate? Maybe upset stomach or butterflies in the stomach, kind of a feeling. Somebody says their fingers get stiff. Anybody have trouble sleeping the night before a big performance? What else? Sweaty palms. Breathing. What happens to your breathing? You just put it right in the chat. Anybody? Yep. Shaking, trembling. Yes, especially hands and feet for me. Does anybody notice their breath becoming sort of faster and more shallow? So rather than sort of a deep belly breath, it tends to get a little bit more shallow. Anybody notice any cognitive changes, problems with memory, difficulty focusing on the task at hand? Anybody get irritable? I do. Boy, you do not want to have a conversation with me 5 minutes before recital. Trouble breathing. What else? Anybody's face become flushed? Face and neck become like it almost looks like you're blushing. This is a big deal for brass players. Your mouth dries out. You stop salivating, which makes it really hard to play a brass instrument. Yeah. Anybody ever experienced an actual blackout where you don't faint, but you sort of lose awareness just for a moment when you're really, really nervous? Okay, well, those are all common symptoms. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Can everyone see that? Okay, Olivia, now that I'm sharing, I lost the chat, so you have to fill me in if there are questions. Yep. Let me just tell you very briefly about my background. I'm a trumpet player. My family lived in small towns around the country growing up, starting in Illinois and then Iowa and then Maine and then North Carolina. So we kind of followed my dad's career around. My first instrument was the piano, and I actually started playing piano in sort of like competitions and graded types of events at a very young age. So that sort of got me past the performance anxiety issue when I was very young, when I was almost too young to know better. Did that for many years. And then my older brother started playing the trumpet, and I really loved it. And I got him to teach me a little bit of the trumpet before I was old enough to start band. And then really, I never experienced big problems with performance anxiety through high school, even through college to some extent, but it wasn't crippling performance anxiety. Then I got a job in a professional orchestra in Russia, and that was fine. And then when I was 28 years old, I went back to graduate school as a master's student, and that is when it really hit for me. I was in this studio with some fantastic young trumpet players, and it was a pretty intense, high pressure situation. We were expected to play a concerto or a sonata for the whole studio every week with piano, plus all our ensembles and our lessons. And it was a pretty intensive environment. I learned a lot, but I also developed a really pretty intense problem with performance anxiety at that time. So that's kind of when I needed to work through performance anxiety. So I'm going to give you, I believe it's 4 different sort of strategies for dealing with performance anxiety. The first one is understanding and regulating what I call, this is just a picture of somebody experiencing anxiety. I think we're all familiar with that. First strategy is understanding and regulating the fight, flight, or freeze response. You might have just heard it called the fight or flight response. So what the fight or flight response is that when we sense that we are in physical danger, we're going to be attacked by a wild animal, or the person in front of us in traffic steps on their brakes really suddenly, and we think we're going to hit them or something like that. There's a set of physical responses that happen in our body, and they happen for a good reason, to protect us. They are triggered by the sympathetic nerve system and two hormones, adrenaline and noradrenaline. And they trigger all those things that we were just describing as negative experiences, right? We talked about the breathing becoming more shallow, the pulse becoming faster, our mouths drying out, starting to tremble. The reason that these things happen is that when we're in danger, every single one of those symptoms that we just named can fill a protective role for us. For example, trouble sleeping the night before a performance. Well, if you're actually about to get attacked by a wild animal, you don't want to be sleepy, right? It's good to be alert. You want to be alert. Your stomach becomes upset, or you have that feeling of butterflies in your stomach, because you know what? If you're in danger, you don't want to be hungry. You don't want to eat if you might have to run really fast to get out of danger, or you might have to defend yourself. That accelerated pulse, that's your body gearing up to give you an extra burst of energy. The face becoming flushed, that's your circulatory system kicking into high gear. Your breathing becoming rapid, that's also preparing you to be able to have this burst of energy if you need to run away or if you need to fight. All of those things, even irritability, there's sort of an increased sensitivity to everything that's going around you, and that can save your life if you're being attacked by a wild animal or otherwise in danger. The difficulty is we're not actually in danger. It just feels like we are when we stand up to perform. Our body can't tell the difference between being attacked and playing a flute recital. It reacts in the same way. Fortunately for us, I talked about the sympathetic nerve system. We also have a parasympathetic nerve system that helps us achieve homeostasis, sort of a balance in the body. Sometimes we need to become more alert and more energized. Other times we need to bring those levels down. And we have a system for doing that as well. And that's one of our best tools in counteracting or managing performance anxiety. So let me show you, hopefully. Come on, slide. For some reason, my slide is not, there we go. The vagus nerve is a part of your physiology, your anatomy, that runs from your brain, the sort of the stem of the brain, all the way to many different parts of your body, your respiratory system, your lungs, your heart, your digestive tract. And it can send a message to calm all those things down. Does anyone know how you can consciously stimulate the vagus nerve to, for example, slow your pulse or stop some of that trembling or that dry mouth? Does anybody have any ideas? You can put them right in the chat. You can even, with this size group, you can unmute yourself if you want. Emily, you can unmute yourself.
I was gonna say things such as like breathing, or I've heard like tapping can be helpful. Like if you like do like bilateral stimulation with like tapping the sides of your body and like aligning the hemispheres or something, that helps.
Absolutely. So you said breathing, and particularly doing deeper, slower breaths. So I want everyone to either stand up or sit in, on a nice, not like slumped back like this, but sit up nice and straight. Let's just try it. We're just going to take 3 deep breaths. We're going to breathe into a count of 4 and out to a count of 4. And I want you to try to breathe low in your body and maybe sort of imagine that breath filling from the base of your spine all the way up. So I'm going to count. You guys are going to breathe. We're going to inhale. Ready? Go. In. 2, 3, 4, out. 2, 3, 4. So you can think, inhale slowly, exhale softly. Let's try it to a count of 5 now. Ready? Go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and release tension. 2, 3, 4. Give yourself a moment to sort of equalize, and then we'll take one more breath. Let's try 6 counts in, 6 counts out. Ready? Go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And in less than 30 seconds, I imagine many of you are already feeling a change in your physical and mental state. I start every day, my first practice session, taking some deep, slow breaths. It helps me just let go of whatever I've been experiencing before that. If I was in traffic or whatever, the copying machine wasn't working, whatever distractions I have, just a little bit of time on very deep breathing. Emily also mentioned touch. There are lots of ways to use massage, even massaging your own shoulders, neck, sometimes for me releases some tension. So physical touch, absolutely. Laughter is another one. That's hard to do by yourself, but I'm sure we've all experienced, if you're in a really tense meeting or conversation and somebody makes a joke, you can just sort of feel some of that tension melt away. Singing can do it for some people. Listening to certain kinds of music, certain kinds of images, often images of nature or certain natural objects can help to stimulate that sort of calming effect. So that's something that we can practice over time and get better and better at. So that's kind of the basics of what's going on physiologically, and a few of the tools that we can use to calm the nervous system. Actually, I'm a little behind on my slides. That was my deep breathing slide. Let's go on to my programming slide. So as musicians, a second strategy that can help a lot with performance anxiety is just making really smart choices about what music to play when that's in our control. So I would say, is there a time to program music that pushes you to the absolute limits of your technical abilities and takes you beyond those limits? Yes, there is a time for that. That time, however, is not when you're managing, or trying to overcome a performance anxiety issue. If you are experiencing performance anxiety in your life, I would say to choose music that falls very, very safely within your comfort zone. What we want to do, and this is especially for the teachers in the crowd, but also for students, is create enough positive, successful performance experiences early on that later on we can start to push those limits more and more. But if those first few performances are just really successful and programmed in a way that we almost can't fail, then that gives us some experiences to draw from and expect success in the future. And if you've had some negative anxiety provoking experiences, maybe back off on the level of difficulty. I like to say a simple piece played beautifully is beautiful, right? And a difficult piece played sloppily is sloppy, right? Nobody's going to go home and say, wow, what a difficult piece that person played. So play something that's simple and beautiful. Also choose, you can fall back on old favorites that you've worked on for many years and that you feel very comfortable with. I like to do a little test. In fact, on my music stand, you can't see it, it's over on the other side of the room. I have a little stack of pennies there. I would say to choose music that you can play at an acceptable level to your own standards 10 times out of 10. And Olivia might actually remember this little trick. It's from an old former faculty member here at Vandercook, Kevin Lepper, a great percussion teacher, used to keep a little stack of 10 pennies. And if there was a difficult passage, he would have a student stack up the 10 pennies. If they play it well once, they can move 1 penny into the other stack. If they play it well again, they can move 2 pennies into the other stack. And the idea is to move all 10 pennies into the other stack. The catch is, if you miss it once, they all go back into the first stack. You start over again. And it's a very simple little idea, but it works really well. And what I noticed when I started using this with myself and my students is a lot of times we'll miss a passage 10 times and then we'll get it right once. And we'll be like, woohoo, I got it. I'm ready to go on. No, you don't. Your odds of getting it right are still 1 in 11, right? The chances are it's not going to go well in a performance. So using the pennies or some other strategy to make sure that you know the piece well enough that the odds are on your side. And if you can get it 10 times in a row and get all 10 of those pennies over there, you've probably done a lot more repetition. Let's see, I talked about setting yourself up for positive performance experiences. Choose music that you think is beautiful or powerful or moving and that you really want to share with an audience. If you're only interested in the technical aspects of the piece, I find that is much more anxiety provoking than sharing an emotional message, at least for me. So we talked about 2 things so far: understanding sort of the fight, flight, response and the physiology behind anxiety. That was one thing. The second thing is programming wisely. The third strategy for managing performance anxiety is prepare early and over prepare. Why? Because there is no such thing as over preparing. It's not possible, right? So I think that often if we've had the opportunity to work with some incredible performers who we really look up to, many great performers create this illusion of ease, that everything's just tossed off, that I can just pick up my trumpet and knock your socks off. But if you really watch those people closely over a prolonged period of time, the vast majority of them are extraordinarily thorough and disciplined in their preparation. They just don't necessarily show that or complain about it, but they do prepare very, very thoroughly. One thing you can do to over prepare or to prepare early, set a timeline and work backwards. So when is the performance date? When is the recital or the contest or the concert or the solo and ensemble festival? And start with that date and work backwards. And I would say 2 weeks before, you want the piece to be performance ready. And for me, that depending on the level of difficulty, that often means that I need to start working on the piece 3 to 6 months before the performance. Okay, this is going to vary to some extent depending where you are in your development. But I like to allow a long time to really get to know the piece. And then during whatever period of time you allot, the way this graph works is starting over here on the left side, that's the first day that you start preparing, you start practicing or woodshedding. And then moving across the screen, we get over here to the day of the performance. And so you can see that on day 1, pretty much 100% of your practice falls below the diagonal line. So you're doing a lot of taking 1 measure or 2 measures, slowing it way down, repeating it many times. I like to use the metronome to increase the tempo in tiny little increments where I can't even tell it's any faster than it was the time before. Stopping a lot, working under tempo a lot. And then as you move through the weeks or days or months towards the performance, you start doing a little bit more running through longer sections of the piece without stopping. And then as you get maybe halfway there towards the moving through time, maybe about half of your practice is going to be running through longer sections and half of your practice is still going to be isolating the difficulties and slowing them down and repeating them. And then as you get close to the performance, the majority of your practice becomes performing the piece. This is important for solo playing, but also for ensemble playing. A lot of conductors get all the way to the day of the performance, and they're still either doing a lot of this isolated practice, or way back here, they never did any of the isolated practice. They just started the piece and ran it through. So you want to sort of have this development from doing lots of isolated, repetitive practice, slow practice at the beginning, to a point where you are doing more and more running straight through the piece. I usually tell myself and my students, play twice as slowly as you think you need to, do twice as many repetitions as you need to. I think it's just human nature. Most of us don't want to admit to ourselves, you know what, for this piece, quarter note equals 60 beats per minute is way too fast. It's not clean. I have to go all the way down to eighth note equals 60 beats per minute and then work it up from there, because it's all that slow practice that makes it clean and makes you feel confident in the end. Olivia, do we have a question?
Yeah, somebody asked, when they're practicing the complete run-throughs, do you think that they should skip the really long rests, or do you think it's good to take the time to rest through those?
That's a great question. On my instrument, for brass instruments, it's actually really important to not necessarily count out all the rests, but to get the instrument off your face and let the blood circulate, because it's a very different physical experience to play the piece if you skip the rests entirely. I often tell students, if it's two measures or less, go ahead and count it out. If it's more than 2 measures, just take a reasonable break. Maybe oil a valve if you need to, and then keep going. When you really get up to the wire and you're in the final weeks before a performance, at that point, hopefully you've done enough listening to recordings of the piece, or depending on the context, maybe you've even practiced it with a pianist, that you can imagine the piano part or the accompaniment part in your mind. Or maybe you have a recorded accompaniment to play along with. If that's the case, then I think it's good to actually sort of play that recording of the accompaniment in your mind during the rest. So you would count out the full numbers, but you're not necessarily sitting there going, 24, 2, 3, 4, 25, 2, 3, 4. You're just hearing the piece, the accompaniment. Any other questions before I go on? It can be very helpful to keep a practice journal where you write down your goals, your experiences. And this is a big thing I'm going to say next, and a process. It's not immediate, but strive towards emotional distance and objectivity in your practice. And by that, I don't mean not to express emotions in your music. I mean, not to beat yourself up and get all frustrated and tell yourself, oh, I'm terrible, I sound awful. I always try to think of the feedback that I would give to a good friend. If a friend said, I have this performance coming up, can you listen to me so I can practice playing it in front of people? Maybe imagine it doesn't go perfectly. The feedback I would give to my friend would be, here are the things that are really good. Here's the things that you can improve on, and here's some ideas how you can improve upon them. They wouldn't be like, oh man, you suck, right? And yet we tell ourselves that all the time in our practice. We're like, oh God, I suck. Or, we just can be really give ourselves much more negative feedback than the feedback we would give someone else. So sometimes just imagining, well, how would I react to this if it weren't me? If it were somebody I care about and I want to help? And then try to give yourself that same feedback. What else? Practice performing. So an easy way to do this is just to make a video of yourself. I know it's painful. I hate watching videos and listening to videos of myself play, especially because the sound of the trumpet, if you don't have a really high quality microphone, it doesn't sound the same. It still is helpful just because you have to keep going. And you notice things when you watch the video, you notice things that were better than you thought they were. You notice things that maybe you didn't know you needed to work on. I would also encourage you to perform in front of a very small, very friendly audience. Maybe you have a couple of friends in your section that play the same instrument or play different instruments. Maybe you have some family members that you can say, hey, can I practice playing for this for you? I want to play it. I want to experience what it's like to be nervous and to play it in front of an audience. Will you be my audience? And then you can do the same thing for them. Maybe if solo and the ensemble is coming up, you can play your piece for your friend. They can play their piece for you. And the more you do that, the more it starts to feel normal and like just a part of your routine and something comfortable. Just make sure they're a friendly, supportive group. Again, this is a big thing, but really try to enjoy the journey and the learning and the development and prioritize that as much as you can over the end product. Because I think when we make it all about that final performance, we're putting too much pressure on ourselves. The final performance is really just a celebration of all the development that's happened on the way there. Yes, Olivia.
So somebody asked, do you find a difference between performance anxiety during a live performance versus a recording? I find recordings more nerve-wracking and was wondering if you had specific advice for that too.
I am with you. I agree, because I feel like I have a higher expectation of perfection in a recording than I do in a live performance. I'm much more forgiving of a little mistake in a live performance because I have no choice, right? I have to keep going. So, okay, that happened. Now let's see if we can keep going and make some great music here. Whereas a performance, there's no limit. You can keep going all night performing that thing. You can keep going until your lips aren't working anymore. So one thing that is helpful for me, I like to, if at all possible, start making my recordings at least 2 weeks before the deadline start. And the first time I sit down to make a recording, I do one track where I keep going no matter what. Even if I miss the first note, I'm going to keep going so that I've got one recording in the can. And if all else fails, at least I've done it once. It sort of alleviates a little bit of that pressure. That said, I do find making recordings extraordinarily frustrating and nerve-wracking too. So you are not alone, I can say that. But I think if you start 2 weeks before, try and do like at least one complete take every day. Even if you're like, there's no way this is going to be the take that I'm going to use, just let it keep going and do one take each day. And then at the end of 2 weeks, you can go back and listen to all 14 and eliminate some and find the one that you think is best. And remember, the reality is it's not going to be perfect. I have been listening to recordings and live performances and performing myself for 40 years, and I have yet to hear a perfect performance. I've heard some amazing, wonderful, powerful performances that, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up and gave me goosebumps. And some of the most transcendent experiences in my life have been performances of music, either playing or listening. But I haven't heard a perfect one, and I probably never will, because we're not machines. And so imperfections are okay. You want that recording to be representative of the way you play. If you can get a recording that's representative of you with all your imperfections and all your wonderfulness, that's success in terms of a recording. Not perfection, but representative. That is very hard to do sometimes. So, but definitely not cramming, not doing it all in one night, doing it over a period of time. Also, for me, the acoustics of the room where I'm performing make a tremendous difference. So if you can get into something like a concert hall, a church, maybe the band room at school, a bigger, more resonant place that actually sounds more like a concert, I usually find recording goes much better for me than if I'm in a little tiny practice room trying to make a performance that, a recording that sounds like a performance. What else? I will not tell you my worst Yeah, I will. I'll tell you my worst recording story, just so that the next time you're making a recording and it's not going well, you'll be like, well, at least I'm not Dr. Schuman. I was in my last year of doctoral studies, and I had been working for probably 4 months or something like that to make a set of digital recordings to use for job applications. These were all in collaboration with a pianist and an organ player. And I had many, many, many tracks. And it was the last night before I was going to mail it off. All I needed to do, I had done everything right. I'd paced myself. I'd had lots of different takes of all the tracks. And then it was the night that I just needed to choose which ones to use. This is pre-MP3s. So I was using, what were those things called? A mini disc recording, which is a technology probably a lot of you have never even heard of. But I had all these tracks, and I went through and I marked which were the best take. And then the way you did it with a mini disc is you just deleted all the tracks in between, the ones you wanted to keep. Well, I got somehow off by one track, and I deleted all the good tracks. And it was 4 months worth of work just down the drain. Fortunately, my pianist and my organ player were like the nicest people in the world, and they got together with me over the next 2 days, and we redid the whole thing and express mailed it, and everything went okay. But boy, that was just one of those moments. I was just crestfallen. So whatever's happening in your recording session, be glad it's not that. What else? I think I covered most of the things under prepare early and over prepare. I said a practice journal can be helpful, making videos, enjoying the journey. Oh, here's a strange one. Experiment with performing by memory. I had, at the time in my life, I told you during my master's studies, I developed a real problem with performance anxiety. And my teacher forced me to perform by memory weekly. And when he first started making me do that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the worst thing for my performance anxiety, because it's more pressure. Now I might just like lose my spot. I might have a memory slip. But he was absolutely right. What I discovered is that playing by memory lessens my performance anxiety. And the reason is, if I've memorized the piece, A, I've really prepared it well. Like I've done a lot of repetition to get to that level. But B, there's just not space in my brain for that internal dialogue of going like, oh no, here comes the high part. I hope I don't miss it. Oh, I hate the way that sounded. Like all those little like extra thoughts going through our brain when we're performing, judging ourselves, prejudging ourselves before we've even played it, reflecting on what we just did, congratulating ourselves. All those things are distractions. We really just want to be in the moment, in the music as it's passing. And if I play by memory, I don't really have any choice about that. If I start letting that internal dialogue go, I'm gonna forget what I'm doing. I'm gonna have a memory slip. So it actually keeps me more focused in the moment to play by memory than to play using sheet music. So I do it a lot, and I usually feel less nervous now that I've done it quite a bit. So it's something to experiment with, and maybe try it in a relatively low pressure performance situation. You may be surprised that playing by memory is actually less nerve-wracking than playing with music in front of you. Okay, next slide. Oops. Why aren't these slides going? Okay. Oh, there we go. Oops. Now I need to go back. Hold on. Yeah. There we go. Strategy number 4 is rituals. I don't know if anybody has ever listened to a podcast called The Happiness Lab. It's a Yale scientist, psychologist who studies happiness. And she did this great episode about rituals. And this is going to get a little gross here. But, well, first of all, let me just ask this. You can put it in the chat. Does anybody have a ritual that they like to do before a performance in the the moments, the hours, maybe the up to 24 hours before a performance. I'll tell you, I like to eat a banana for breakfast. The night before, I like to do what's called creative visualization, which is where you go in a quiet place, close your eyes, and just imagine in as much detail as you can the whole performance from the moment you walk on stage to the end, going exactly the way that you want it to, like everything, how you're going to breathe, how you're going to walk on stage. I do that the night before. The morning of, I usually eat a banana. And in the moments before, or the hour before, I do a nice, relaxed warm-up routine on my instrument that makes me feel more relaxed. Olivia, I don't think I can see. Do we have any rituals in the chat there?
Yeah, so I look at myself in the mirror and I tell myself, you worked hard, you can do this. Like I give myself a little pep talk. I also eat a banana. Somebody said, so this is where Matt Engelson gets the banana thing from. And then someone said they wear a little golden violin pin for luck. And then somebody says, I tell myself to turn nerves into excitement. I watch funny videos or shows, meditate or pray. I chant to myself, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. I just do the shake thing. Lots of theater kids do the 8, 4, 2, 1. And then someone that said, I do the shaking thing too.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you some bizarre rituals that people have used in the past. Let's start with Yuri Gagarin. Yuri Gagarin was the first human being to go into outer space. So this is during the Cold War. There was kind of this competition between the Soviet Union and the United States. We were the first ones to make it to the moon. But before that, they were the first ones to send an astronaut into space. And on that initial successful space flight, this is really gross, they were taking the bus out to the vehicle, and Gagarin, all suited up in his spacesuit, had to go to the bathroom. And this is actually very common. Some of you may have experienced this. It's another one of those systems that kicks in when your adrenaline is flowing. And so he got out of the van and very discreetly urinated on the rear right tire of the van. And ever since then, every successful space flight, astronauts, not just Russian astronauts, American astronauts, astronauts from all over the world, male and female, have done this. They urinate on the right rear tire of a van. Bizarre, right? So we all know that has nothing to do with whether or not the rocket crashes, right? Probably most of those things that Olivia was just reading from the chat also have nothing to do with whether the performance is successful, except here's the point that Laurie Santos, the psychologist, was making in the Happiness Lab. They actually do. Because if you have a ritual and you believe that ritual is going to bring you success, that will affect your physiology. That will affect the adrenaline. That will affect the vagus nervous system. It will also, like deep breathing and like human touch and like laughter, it will ease some of the energy or the anxiety. So having a ritual, even if it's complete nonsense, like Yuri Gagarin's ritual, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that one before a performance, but it can be complete nonsense. But if it's meaningful to you, that's why I put the 4-leaf clovers. Obviously, the number of leaves on a plant they don't really have anything to do with what happens, except that our belief that, here's a positive omen, everything's going to go okay, that our belief in it is what actually has an impact. So I know another interesting, there's all kind, by the way, astronauts, more than anyone I've ever heard of, have a bunch of them. The Russian astronauts always get blessed by an Orthodox priest before their flight. There's this whole thing with flattening coins before they go, like having a train run over them. They all do a movie night. They all watch the same movie the night before their space travel. There's just a bunch of rituals that they do. But I also thought it was interesting. A lot of performers have rituals. Beyonce has a playlist. Every single performance, she listens to the same playlist. She does the same set of stretches, and she does a 1-hour meditation. Because can you imagine, like, we, as nervous as we get about our little performances, imagine playing for tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people. I actually think rituals are a good idea. Just some simple little thing that makes you feel like, yeah, I got this. Let's see. There we go. This is the quote that I actually got from Mr. Ingleson. He shared this with me. I can't quite see the top of my screen because of my Zoom stuff, but you guys can read it for yourself. It's just kind of like a final thought that I wanted to share with you, which just kind of reminds us all it's a journey, and to try and have as positive outlook as you can about learning and getting better. Do we have any last questions or even tips that any of you want to share that have helped you with performance anxiety? Oh, I should explain about the apple too. I wrote down a few final thoughts here in my notes. One is this idea that performing is not really about you. That can be very comforting to remember that you're really just the medium, right? There's this beautiful piece of music that someone has composed, and there's an audience who we want to share that music with. And that music travels through you to the audience so that they can experience it. It's not so much about you. Also, performing should be a way of connecting and sharing and helping your audience, letting them feel something that maybe is healing or maybe is sad and they need to feel that sadness, or maybe is uplifting. And then the reason I put a little picture of an apple on this slide, one thing I will never forget this moment. This is now probably 30 years ago. I heard a trumpet masterclass by Phil Smith, who used to be the principal trumpet of the New York Philharmonic, and I think it's one of the great trumpet players of all time. And he was listening to a student play a piece, and then he said to the student, when I perform a piece, I try to think of every single note as an apple. And he said, whether it's a whole note or a 16th note, it doesn't matter to me. I try to think of every note as the most perfect, red, beautiful, shiny apple. And I am giving that apple to my audience. I'm presenting it to my audience as a gift, every note I play. And I thought, that is the difference between Phil Smith and the rest of us, right? Even if it's like 1 30-second note in a long run, every one of them is a gift to us, you know? And I think that's a great way to think of it. Again, it's not so much about a measuring stick of judging you and how you compare with someone else or with some abstract standard of perfection. It's about giving this gift, the most beautiful gift that you can give your audience in that moment. So I think that's a great way to think about it. I see Emily has a comment or a question. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, another ritual. I don't know if this really counts, and if this is like a universal thing, but when we are on stage before a concert, you know that moment when you're like starting to get ready to play and you're not quite there, but I always end up kind of like talking to my director with the other people in like the front row or sometimes like the second row, and we end up like making each other laugh or just like smile before I perform, and that's probably like one of my favorite like moments and rituals before, and it just like calms me down and makes me like ready to play, and I really love those moments.
Yeah, so it's two things. It's a ritual and it's tapping into that parasympathetic nervous system that helps us relax. That's a great one. I would even argue that tuning in the way that we tend to do it before a concert is more of a ritual than an actual tuning of the instrument. For me, if I'm really tuning my instrument, I have to sit down with the piano for a few minutes and play more than one note. But this business of like, just we're all going to play one note together, I think it's more like a ritual, like, okay, we got this, we're ready to go. Declan, do you have a question or comment?
First of all, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, all right. All right. Yeah, I remember back in high school, that was something we always did before concerts, was tunings, but then also just like connecting as a band. And I think that was also part of the reason that, like, in high school, that like I wasn't like scared of concerts or anything, because I knew like we were all in this together, and like we were all able to connect as like one band and become one almost.
Yeah, that's great. And so maybe you can sometimes tap into those early positive experiences too as you move through your career. Olivia.
Yeah, there's some questions in the chat. So someone said, well, first a comment. Mia said, I really like stretching before concerts. It calms my nerves a lot. And then a question someone had was, I think I get the most anxiety from sight reading in an audition or even just in class. How can I prepare myself before sight reading something?
That is a great question. Two things. One of them, just to state the obvious, make sure that you're doing it on a regular basis. If you have like an old etude or method book that you've developed beyond it, it's not super challenging for you, not challenging enough that you need to work on it for a week or whatever. Just pull that out and do a few minutes of sight reading every day. If you're a person who tends to stop and fix things, and that's a whole other thing, I won't get off on that tangent, but I think there are really kind of like two personality types of musicians. There are the ones who sort of like, you put a piece of music in front of them, they see the double bar at the end of the page, and come what may, they're going to plow through until they get there. And then there's the type of musician that tends to often stop and fix things in their practice. Both types of musicians, there's an advantage to both types. And once you realize which type you are, I'm very much the perfectionist that stops and fixes everything. But now that I know that about myself, if I'm practicing for an hour, I can take 20 minutes and say, okay, for those 20 minutes, I'm going to try to be the other type of player that plows through. Because if I want to build endurance and strength and range on the trumpet, I have to do it by keeping going sometimes. But anyway, if you're a person who tends to stop and fix things, when you're practicing sight reading, don't let yourself do that. And I say that lightly, but it's really hard. If your instinct is to always stop and fix things, it is unbelievably hard not to. That's why a duet partner is actually a great way to improve your sight reading, because they will force you to keep going. They will bring some music that you haven't seen. And so practicing duets is a great way to work on sight reading. But in the actual moment, when you're in an audition or a jury or something where there's sight reading, I would say the most important element of music to focus on in sight reading, far and away, is rhythm. And I think we tend to forget about it. And we don't want to miss an accidental. We don't want to miss a note. You can actually miss an accidental in sight reading. And if your pulse is strong, you can recover from that. But if your mind strays away from rhythm, first of all, you lose that sense of being in the moment and that sense of focus. But also it can be much harder to recover when you lose your sense of pulse. So I really try to focus on rhythm as much as possible and let go of, sort of second guessing whether or not I missed an accidental or something like that. That's very helpful for me. Also, remember at the beginning of this class when we took those 3 deep breaths, it really didn't take that long to kind of calm ourselves down. So if it's the sort of sight reading where they give you a few minutes to look the page over, you can use that time to make sure that you're breathing, inhaling slowly and then exhaling softly too, to settle yourself down. And then remind yourself too, they're not looking for perfection. I know that when people audition for Vandercook for admission, we're looking for really one thing in sight reading. We want to know how well they can handle, like how well they can keep their poise when they make a mistake. We want to see them make a mistake because we want to see how they react. As future band directors or music teachers, their students are going to make mistakes and they're going to need to be able to keep their composure, keep their focus. So if you make that, the goal is not perfection, the goal is to keep calm, then that can be helpful too. What else, Olivia?
Somebody said, how do you get through an audition when you feel like everyone is so much better than you, especially when you don't know anyone else in the room?
Yeah, it's really hard. And it comes back to what I said about, try to over time, gradually cultivate a mindset where it's not so much about comparing yourself to other people as it is about sharing something with your audience. And even in audition, you do have an audience. Like, how wonderful is it when I'm on the listening end of the audition? I'm the one judging the audition. When somebody comes in and makes some music, it's just like, thank you. I've been hearing right notes all day. Like, that's not exciting for me. I want to hear some emotion and some feeling and some expression, even in an audition situation. So I think if you can think of the goal of the audition is two things. A successful audition, you play in a way that's representative of what you can do. And it just doesn't matter who else is there and what they can do, because you have no control over that. There's always going to be somebody better out there. That's not really, the goal isn't to be the best one. I guess if it's in certain kinds of auditions, you don't win if you're not the best one. But I would say it's a successful audition if you play in a way that is representative of what you can do. And if you communicate something to the listener, the audience member. Also, the more, like everything, the more you do it, the more comfortable you get. This probably goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Just for the record, every one of you is a worthy, wonderful person, whatever you do on your instrument. Sometimes it can just start to feel like our entire value is our playing. No, like, everybody has bad performances, and as much as we care and as passionate as we are about music and as moving as it can be, it's not the basis for your worth as a human being. And you got to get out of that mindset. So, what else?
Do you have any podcasts or book recommendations on this topic besides the podcast that you already spoke on earlier?
Yeah, I would underline that one again. It's called The Happiness Lab. It's on Pushkin Industries is the podcast company where you can find it. There's one that I really like that's not specifically about this, but it often comes up, called The Brass Junkies. It's kind of a jokey podcast. They interview famous brass players, but this is a topic that often comes up in those interviews. There are also some books that I really love. There's one called A Soprano on Her Head. It's an old book, but it's really wonderful. I can't remember the author's name right now. Also, this is a weird recommendation, but it's called The Inner Game of Tennis by Timothy Galway. I like it better than The Inner Game of Music because it allows you to draw your own parallels. But it's really about sort of those internal conversations and how we can be our own worst enemies sometimes, and how we can, it's just sort of some strategies for being in the moment rather than judging ourselves.
One more that somebody said is, I have a flute solo coming up in a few weeks, and I'm really struggling because I have very bad anxiety. It's very hard for me to play in front of the class, and I'm scared for what will happen on stage. I know the solo really well, but when playing in front of people, I don't do well. What should I do?
I think you should put together a small, friendly audience. And if there's no one else, I'll do it for you. You've got my email address right there. Send me an email. Say, Dr. Schuman, can I play my flute solo for you? And we'll set up a little Zoom call, and I'll listen to you play your flute solo. And I bet you there are a handful of other people that would do that for you. I bet you your band director would do it. Maybe some family members. If playing at church can be a really good thing. That's a really receptive audience. And often the music director needs people to help them fill parts of the service. Like any group of people you can put yourself in front of, and play it when it's not the actual concert, so that when you get to the actual concert, it's almost like, oh, here we go again. I've played this in front of so many people, and now I'm going to play it in front of people again. That would be a good thing to do. And definitely start with me. I'm a very, very non-judgmental audience. I think we might have to wrap up, but thank you all so much for coming, and all the best to you wherever your musical journey takes you. And I hope we cross paths again. And you have my email. Let me know if there's anything at all I can do to help.
Thank you again, Dr. Schuman. Please give her a round of applause. That was wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you all so much for tuning in. Have a great evening. This will be posted on Vandercook's YouTube channel in the next coming weeks. So if you had friends that you'd like to share this with, or you just want to revisit it again, it will be up on our YouTube channel soon. And thank you again so much for joining us, and good luck to all of your future performances. Now you have some tips in your belt. Alrighty, see you guys.
Bye.